Hey guys, it's Evan from Interrobang Tarot, and I am chipping away at AMAs from Discord. So let's keep going with this series. I've got a few for this video that all are on themes of connecting to the cards. So someone asked, do or did you have a routine or ritual around new decks? And the answer is no. My divination brain goes out the fucking window when I get a new deck, and my artist ooh shiny crow brain completely takes over. I respect, appreciate, and admire deck interview spreads, and I just don't do that. When I get a new deck, the first thing I want to do is just rifle through and look at all the pictures and soak up the art, and not even think about it. I just engage with it on a very base, ooh pretty level. Shallow. So that's fun. And then I usually just jump right into one card draws. So instead of putting the deck to work with a rigorous spread or interviewing the deck, I'll just rifle through with some quick casual whatever's on my mind and see how it handles single card draws and what kind of answers I get and how I click with it. And it's pretty organic. And I do like to look, so if I get a new deck that has any kind of guidebook or text that goes with it, I do love to look at those. I don't tend to read them cover to cover though. I'll just, when the deck is new, I'll look at what the text says before I even think about my own interpretations, because I want to get to know the author and illustrator's voice. So that's part of it. But mostly I just want to look at the pretty pictures. Be excited to have a new shiny. Someone asked, what cards out of any of the decks speak to you the most or have the most significance? So I probably should have asked a clarifier. I'm not sure if they're talking about my decks specifically or about tarot in general, if I have a card that speaks to me more than the others. So I'll say generally the Fool is one of my biggest. That almost feels like a cop-out to say that, as a tarot artist, to be oh yeah, I like the Fool. Because it's kind of an everyman and it stands in for the whole system. But I really resonate with the Fool. It's a pretty big one for me spiritually. It's one of my life goals, irrespective of tarot. It is one of my life goals to make the brooding goofball a named archetype. And that archetype is my archetype. I over-identify with work from over the garden wall to a problematic degree. So the Mockingbird of Arrows is probably the one of the cards that I most resonate with in the Black Ink deck specifically, because I have a thing with mockingbirds. I am a singer, and I do have a history of both a lot of dabbling and facility with mimicry and working in different styles, and sometimes trouble finding and hanging on to a steady voice because I too easily slip into different modes. I studied set design. That's my background. So we learned to imitate other people's styles. Part of your technical training is to be able to work in a bunch of different veins and modes and to be able to copy any style that you need on hand when you're doing scenic art. So coming out of that, on the other side of that, trying to uncover and excavate a voice as an independent artist was really challenging, because I had developed 4 or 5 different hands that were all my hands, but they didn't match each other. And it's really hard to market yourself when you're working in 5 different styles that look like they're done by different people. Running themes of a lot of creative expression, a lot of masking and facility with mimicry, but also voice loss within that has been a big thing. So one thing that I'm on a perpetual soapbox with is the concept that multiplicity is not duplicity, and having range is not the same thing as being deceptive, but we live in a culture where it's often taken that way. So people with really strong Gemini in their charts, Gemini suns and moons, mine is a Gemini Venus, might be feeling this. It particularly activates for me within things like relationships and within artistry. of just really needing range, really needing different modes to sink into, really wanting to go into that Mockingbird, trying out different songs in your catalog, and to play with mimicry and repetition, and to play with range and doing different stuff as something that's vital and necessary to your creative process. So I'm at a little bit of a crossroads with my work where I've masked down and niched down to an unhealthy degree for me, and I'm trying to break out of like just the tarot mode, because that's not actually sustainable for me long term, and it's just a tiny fraction of what I do as an artist. But the core thing behind, like the core drive behind my tarot work, it's not about tarot specifically. It's about a desire to scramble and remix culture. I'm really drawn across a bunch of different media to patterns and stories and mimetic scraps of cultures that repeat. I'm really interested in repeating cultural fragments that get passed down through generations. I was obsessed with things like fractured fairy tales when I was a little kid. I saw the PBS special of the Into the Woods when I was a little kid. They did a video recording of the original cast production, and that hit me at a formative age. It was one of my favorite pieces of media for a really long time. And so I love stuff like that that takes kind of folk cultural and historic things, artistic things that repeat through the generations. And I really like to take that stuff and twist it through, especially through marginal or liminal perspectives. So tarot is one of the things that I wanted to do that too. And I do use tarot all the time. It's not that I'm like not into tarot, but it's part of a bigger picture. And the bigger picture is to take those repeating scraps of culture that get passed through the generations and to twist them and retell them in interesting ways. And I want to do that with other stuff too. This is going to sound so pretentious. So Brian Eno, Brian Eno's a pop musician and producer. He was a famous glam rocker from Roxy Music in the 70s, and he's gone on to do all kinds of production and electronic music work. And he and his friend came up with Eno and Schmidt's oblique strategies, which are these like creative prompts that you draw at random. It's almost like a cartomancy, divination kind of thing. And the idea is that you draw one at random and they present strategies for working through your creative projects. So I had a college professor who was like really into Eno and Schmidt's oblique strategies and made us use them. And I was witch sitting in the back being like, oh, this is divination. But one of my favorite ones of them is repetition is a form of change. So I'm interested in like historic cultural games of telephone where repetition ends up degrading what it's repeating, degrading or mistranslating or warping or evolving. And then I'm also interested in things that do get passed down in ways that evolve slowly but still retain some of their original roots, but that can be queered and made stranger, and sometimes made to say things that oppose or contradict what they originally said. I think about this a lot in terms of the challenge for white artists, for settler artists. You know, we want to avoid cultural appropriation, which is a form of toxic mimicry. But the culture that we have to work with in our natal cultures and in our home cultures and in the cultures of our ancestry is really fucking toxic. And so, you know, if that's the material that we want to use and build our current and evolving cultures off of, we immediately have to turn around and face centuries of abuse and internalized colonialism and bigotries and all kinds of toxic shit, like, we have to play with our own toys, but our own culture fucking sucks. That's why white people are so hungry. Not all of it, but a lot of it, right? So with that as our backdrop, satire becomes so important. Mockery becomes important. And composting is really important. What we have to work with artistically that's ours to speak to, as settlers and as white artists and white creators, really needs to be composted. So this age calls for a lot of cultural thanatologists. It calls for a lot of cultural composters, and then it also calls for jesters and satirists. That as we repeat and absorb and reiterate on legacy culture, those mimetic things that are being repeated and passed down, we should be mocking them. We should be reframing them in our own voices. We should be making new things out of them, and we should be composting, integrating what needs to fucking rot. And pass and become fertilizer for something else and something better in our own lifetimes. So that is a big part of what this card and what the Mockingbird means to me as well. Okay, so one of the Discorders asked, were there any cards that you got stuck on? And yes, for sure. One of the most annoying things to me about my working style as an illustrator, this doesn't come up so much with client work. So like if I'm working for somebody else and I have guidelines to follow and they, you know, we're working to their specifications or their vision, I do a lot more sketching and process work, and we refine our ideas in advance and figure out, you know, a pretty clear idea of what they're going to want before I move on to the final stages of drawing. There'll be several rounds of sketching that are detailed, that get passed off to the client, and you know, then we do notes and refine things. And when there is that little bit of outside pressure, I can tune in and pay attention for process work really well. But when I'm working on personal projects, my brain checks out on sketching. Like, I cannot. I end up just doing chicken scratch. It's like I can't concentrate. I know how to draw, but my drawing abilities do not show up to the table if there's no stakes involved. I need some degree of pressure to concentrate. When it's personal work, I basically end up skipping a lot of the sketching and go straight to things that could be final versions, because otherwise my drawing will just come out crap and the rough sketches and thumbnails won't even be usable. You're just absolute scratch. So it drives me nuts because I very often when I'm working on personal projects realize that I don't like what I'm drawing right after it's already done. Again, that doesn't happen in the client stuff because the more upfront process is already there. But I tend to kind of like work out my rough ideas in finished form when I'm doing unstructured things that are just, you know, passion projects. And so I end up generating a lot of like finished drawings that I don't like at the end and then have to redo. So I wouldn't say necessarily like, I don't think there were any cards where I was like, oh, I have no idea what I'm going to draw for this, but there were a bunch of cards that I realized I didn't like what I had drawn like right after it was done, and I ended up redrawing like 3, 4, 5, 6 times some of them. So most of the artwork that I do is actually pretty maximalist. It's very intricate and detailed, and the minimalism in the decks were you know, that was project based. And it's to serve certain purposes when you're reading. To work in a minimalist style like that, it's still really important for the image, and maybe even more important for the final image to be the right image, to be very crisp and clear, and to be doing exactly what I want it to be doing. And that required a bunch of iteration throughout. So most of these cards, maybe not most, a lot of these cards I did at least twice. Some I did many times over to get it to the version that I liked the best. I think in this deck, the Priestess, the Witch Priestess card, is the one that I redrew the most times. I think that one went through 5 or 6 iterations. That one gave me a lot of grief. And those weren't all digitized, but they were all inked, which is super annoying. So yeah, you think you're gonna spend less time designing the deck because you're working in a simplified, smaller, shrunk down style, and it still ended up taking forever and a day. So it's like, damn it, if it's gonna be simple, it has to be right. It's even more important to nail the fine details and get those clean lines and, you know, the precise composition that you want. There are artists who work much more quickly and loosely and come out with very fun and engaging designs and stuff. That's, you know, my own working hangups. Trip me up. All right, I think that wraps up the AMA questions that we had on those themes of card specific questions. So we'll call it a day on that video. If you have any questions about tarot or questions for me about my process, any of the crafts that I do specifically, you can throw those at me in the comments or join our Discord or Patreon communities, and you can send in questions there. And if we get some juicy questions for video fodder, maybe I'll do a video on them later. All right, thanks for watching and take care, guys.